You were not made to be emotional.
Men can cry. So it's okay to be weak.
Men are not meant to be dominant. Men are meant to be submissive.
The most beautiful and the most terrifying thing about being a man is you're born without value. Society doesn't care about you. You're only going to be cared about based on how useful you are.
Dispelling toxic masculinity and really redefining what it means to be a man.
No one man should have all that power. The clock's ticking, I just count the hours. Stop tripping, I'm tripping off the power.
If you've been with us over the last 2 weeks as we started Necessary Masculinity, you know that I've been aiming at lifting our eyes up, being inspired to something of a calling, of an identity of what it means to be a man, and in particular, a Christian man in the world today, and what good that is for us, for the women around us, and for the world. And I'm going to finish the series today with a little bit of a different posture. I today want to take us on a journey to put our heads down, to appreciate what it's going to take to actually work this out in our life if we will ever experience the aspirational and inspirational view of what it means to be a Christian man. And so let me start with a story that's a little bit brutal, honestly, in its telling, but I think it draws the contrast that we need. In 2018, a young man named Ian David Long walked into the Borderline Bar and Grill in Thousand Oaks, California. He's a former Marine. He was living in his mom's basement at the time, and he was fighting some demons. And that day, when he visited a restaurant that he had been to many times before, this time he came wearing a dark hoodie, sunglasses. He threw in smoke grenades and started firing. That day, he killed 12 people in the Borderline Bar and Grill, and he shot 12 others who were injured but survived. This is a man who was strong, he was skilled, and on the inside, he was acting out of fighting the demons that had built up in his life. In the bar that night, in the restaurant that night, there was another man. His name was Matt Winterstrom. He was only 20 years old, and he was wearing his baseball hat backwards and had a beard like a lot of other college kids in the restaurant that night. And when he heard shots fired, Matt sprung into action. And at great risk to his own life, he started to get all the people in the restaurant, in particular the women, and get them behind tables. When he had a moment, he took the bar stools, broke the windows, and he helped 35 people get out of the restaurant that night, and then he went back in. Matt himself is skilled and strong, but he had something else inside of him that guided him. And in a television interview that night, he named exactly what it was with blood on his sleeve. He said, "My life is taken care of. I know where I'm going if I die, so I was not worried to sacrifice." In this microcosm, we have two young men, both who have skill and strength, but have something else going on inside. In this microcosm, we have one young man who used his skill and strength to take and destroy life, and another young man who used his skill and his strength to preserve and to protect life with a sacrificial responsibility. And the question is, what kind of masculinity do we want? Interestingly, in that same year, 2018, the American Psychological Association came out with guidance for the first time in counseling men and boys. And they suggested that traditional masculinity is psychologically harmful. But I have a question for you. Which one of the two guys that night demonstrated traditional masculinity? Of course, there's a kind of toxic masculinity when people are fighting their demons inside that is harmful. But would we want to be a place that takes the necessary masculinity that our world needs and toss it out at the same time? For anyone who's paying attention today, you know that there is a vacuum right now, a void for young men, middle school boys, high school boys, college-age men, guys in their 20s, and I think even older men, who are looking for a North Star, something that could guide us with purpose and a sacrificial responsibility. And in the absence of a voice for healthy, necessary masculinity, it's getting filled with other voices. This is Andrew Tate. Andrew Tate is a world champion kickboxer. He's a podcaster. He has a big audience among young men. And he's all about discipline and loyalty and strength, and also all about getting rich and getting laid. And that is the message that he has for a North Star for young men in our world. In fact, Recently, a warrant was put out for his arrest for human trafficking as he's trying to lead people in this direction. This is Jack Doherty. He's 21 years old now, and he's a YouTuber who's gotten, get this, over 6 billion views. If you watch his channel, you will see lots of stuff about cars and mansions and money and women in bikinis and pranks gone wrong. And his voice right now is filling a vacuum and a void for young men in our world, giving them something to aim at that is not worth aiming at. New York University recently did a study that said young men in our world today are 4 times as likely as young women to commit suicide, 3 times as likely to be addicted, 12 times as likely to be incarcerated. And the leader of that study, Scott Galloway, said this: "Our society has absolutely no empathy for young men. If any group was killing themselves at 4 times the rate of a control group, we would move in with programs." And then he suggests this: if we're going to raise better men, we need to be better men. And that's the embrace of a man who follows Jesus, aimed at sacrificial responsibility with a masculinity that is necessary and healthy. Some of you in this room were exposed to porn so early, or now are exposed to it so often, that it has totally messed up a normal, healthy, satisfying sexual life with the place it should be expressed inside a marriage. Some of you in this room were bullied as a young man, and nobody stepped in to protect you. And now for the rest of your life, you've been fighting whatever comes your way. But there's a better vision for this. And so we're asking these 3 questions for this series. Do the men of Suncrest look any different than the men of the world? Does it mean anything to be part of this community and the way that it shapes our lives? And would you step into that? Second, do those who follow Jesus really have anything better to offer? Better than Jack Doherty or Andrew Tate or Joe Rogan or anyone else, any of the other voices? What if following Jesus and the call to noble, sacrificial responsibility was the calling? It's a better calling. And the third question is simple: what is healthy masculinity? And so for the rest of our time today, I'm going to sit in 10 verses in a section of the New Testament called 2 Timothy. It's called 2 Timothy because the Apostle Paul is writing a letter to a young man that he's mentored in the faith. His name is Timothy. This is the second letter that he's written. To give you a little bit of context for this, Paul, many of you know his story. He was a person who was out killing Christians. He was anti-Christianity. And then he had an encounter with Jesus after the resurrection. And I'll tell you, if you have an encounter with someone after they've died and they're alive again, it will change you. And it changed him. And he became the greatest missionary, full of noble, sacrificial responsibility that this world has ever known. This letter that Paul's writing to Timothy is Paul's last letter. Oh, he wrote lots of them. And actually, starting next week, I'm doing a series from the letters of Paul. Can't wait to share it with you. But this is the last one he wrote. We know that because at the end of this letter, he says to Timothy, "The time has come for my departure. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I've kept the faith. And now there is in store for me a crown of righteousness, which the righteous judge will award to me on that day." Paul and Timothy were partners in crime. And I say that literally because it was illegal to preach the gospel, and that's exactly what these guys were doing. So I'm going to walk through this passage with you, and I'm going to try to do 2 things, which is usually a total fail within one message, but I think we can handle it today. On one hand, I want to teach you to fish, guys and ladies, to say, hey, let's use the passage and imagine what it would be like if you and I read the scriptures every day. How would we go about doing this? I think this passage is a good example for how you would do that in your own life. And then we'll take a small section out of this passage, and I will actually give you a fish for today, which I think gives a calling, particularly to the guys in this room, for what it looks like to forge yourself in healthy masculinity. Here's how he opens 2 Timothy chapter 2. He says, "Timothy, my dear son, Be strong through the grace that God gives you in Christ Jesus. Now, when Paul calls Timothy his son, this is significant. He's not his biological son. Actually, we know a little bit about Timothy. The two people mentioned in Timothy's life in the scriptures are his mother and his grandmother, Lois and Eunice. We hear nothing of Timothy's dad. We don't believe Timothy's dad was a follower of Jesus. And so a guy like Paul, and maybe like you, said, I'll take responsibility for some young men around here. And he brought someone in under his wing and started to shape his life. And he's going to teach him to be strong. But notice where the strength comes from. The strength actually comes from grace. Grace is the opposite of arrogance. It's not puffing your chest out and acting like you're a big deal. It's being confident that the strength in you comes from somewhere else. Grace is never demanded. It is always received. And so for those of us who are looking for real, good, godly strength with something on the inside that guides us, grace is the right North Star. Ladies, I know you've been patient with us over a couple of weeks as I've mostly talked to the guys, but I want you to hear what's going on here. Paul is talking to a young man, and he's going to give him guidance for a manly context. Paul's letters, as you'll find out as I start next week, are occasional letters. That's what we call them. It means he was writing to specific times, specific situations, and so he would address those things in particular. And in chapter 3, which we won't get to today, Paul talks about how many of the men of the world are preying on vulnerable women, and what he's doing is he's calling Timothy to be a man who stands in contrast to the men of the world. But this is what Paul does all the time. You can take all the lessons that Paul has for men, ladies, and put them into your own life. There are other places where Paul addresses women, and the lessons are just as good for guys. He's just addressing something going on with the women in that situation. And so, this is the image, the vision that he gives us. In verse 2, he says, you have heard me teach things. Now you, Timothy, teach these truths to other trustworthy people who will be able to pass them on to others. Don't miss this. This is Paul's vision. That you wouldn't just receive something and let it shape your life, but you would receive something from the scriptures and you would let it shape your life, and then you would pass it on and they would pass it on. That this is a relational experience called church. And this is so wild to me because in many ways I think, well, I receive things from Paul. I'm like Timothy here. I'm passing it to you. And my question is, who are you passing it to? You know, over the last couple of weeks, I got a lot of good feedback on these messages. People say, oh, Greg, I shared that with a friend. I sent him the link. I did that. Listen, I'm very grateful that you share those. Our stats show that you're sharing them. But you know what would be even better than you sending someone a link of me talking? It would be you taking the lesson and then engaging someone relationally and saying, hey, I'm going to pass this on in this way. This is the picture of church. He then gives us what's really the middle part of this passage. Let me read it just for a moment, and I'm going to come back to this section later. He says, endure suffering along with me as a good soldier of Christ Jesus. Soldiers don't get tied up in the affairs of civilian life, for then they cannot please the officer who enlisted them. And athletes cannot win the prize unless they follow the rules, and hardworking farmers should be the first to enjoy the fruit of their labor. In just a minute, I'm going to come back to this section of the passage and try to apply it to our lives. But I want you to see what he says to all of us next about this passage. He says, think about what I am saying. The Lord will help you understand all of these things. Listen, one of the visions that's coming out of this message, if you remember the stats last week about devout followers of Jesus, one of the characteristics is devout followers of Jesus have an aim that every single day they will experience the scriptures and they will experience some reflection and some prayer. They don't always hit it every single day. Life gets busy, but it is their aim and they hit it often enough. And I think for the guys and the ladies in this room, this is the right aim. And then Paul is telling us what to do with that. He says, hey, you're going to come across a passage and it's going to say things like, be like a soldier, be like an athlete, be like a farmer. And he says, here's all you have to do. Read the passage and then think about it. Think about it. You can understand what it says. Is it nice to have a guy on a platform explaining it? Of course it is. But you can do this on your own. The Lord, in fact, will help you understand these things. And so I am calling you to a daily habit, the aim of saying, I'm going to spend some time in the scriptures and I'm going to spend some time reflecting on them. And if you have 10 minutes, please hear this. Do not spend 10 minutes reading the Bible and then close it and go on with your day. Spend 2 minutes reading the Bible and 8 minutes thinking about it. Thinking about what it means for your life so that you can integrate something in your own life. Listen, I spend almost my whole week preparing to stand up here, and I think, man, there's gonna be more than 1,000 people listening to this. How in the world can I get it to hit someone's life directly when there's so many different stories? But if you just think about it for your life, you can think, for me, what does it mean to be like a soldier, like an athlete, like a farmer? You can do this. And I really want to encourage you, if you could take 20 minutes a day and read the scriptures for 7 minutes and then think about it and pray about it and ask the Lord to help you understand these things for 13 minutes, it can shape who you are. This is teaching you how to fish instead of just giving you a fish. And then he finishes it up like this. He says, always remember that Jesus Christ was raised from the dead. That's the foundation of everything. If Christ was raised from the dead, then all this is true. If he wasn't raised from the dead, none of it is true. And Jesus is our North Star. Now, a lot of times in this room, I'll say, well, some of you are followers of Jesus, some of you aren't. Let me talk for a moment to those of you who aren't followers of Jesus. You've not given your life to this. You haven't devoted yourself to it. You're not a Christian. You would say that. If that's you, I want you to appreciate that following Jesus to some degree is baked into the Western world. The models of masculinity in particular, anything that is noble, anything that's for sacrifice, anything that says I'd give my life for something, a cause that's worthy, that's Jesus. And while you may not consider yourself a follower of Jesus, this North Star is following the model of Jesus. It's not Nero. It's not Caesar. It's not Napoleon. It's not John Wayne. And it is not Joe Rogan. Jesus is the North Star. And so if we remember him, we shape our lives around his direction. He says, this is the good news. The good news is that Christ was raised from the dead. And because I preach this good news, I am suffering. And I've been chained like a criminal. The Apostle Paul is under house arrest, chained like a criminal as he's writing this. But the word of God cannot be chained. Oh, don't miss that. This is why it's so important to have the scriptures in your life essentially every day. The word of God will break through no matter what's going on in your life, and it will call you to something probably that costs you. So I'm willing to embrace anything if it will bring salvation and eternal glory to Christ Jesus. And I just want you to see what Paul's doing here. Guys, can I talk to you just for a second? If you live the life, the noble calling of sacrificial responsibility of following Jesus, it will cost you. You will endure suffering. This is not a life that's aimed at pleasure and comfort as the ultimate North Star. And anyone who's going to step into something like that absolutely should do the calculation to say, well, do I think this is worth it? It's going to cost me something. Is it worth it? And I just want you to see that Paul did the calculation. I hope you come to the same calculation. That if I could lead, I could be a part of this world of leading more and more people to embrace Christ, to experience eternal salvation and glory. Would I trade some hardship and some suffering and some sacrifice and some time and some money for that? I hope that you will. That is the necessary masculinity that comes with following Jesus. So you could take a passage like that and you could think about it. And you could ask God, the Lord, to help you understand, and he will. But for the time that we have left today, can I just look at these 3 images that Paul gives to Timothy and ask all of us in this room to embrace these ourselves? He starts with the idea of a soldier. He says, endure suffering along with me as a good soldier of Jesus Christ. They don't get distracted. They don't get tied up in civilian affairs. You gotta be focused like a soldier. You know, one of the challenges of guys today is aimlessness. To say, we don't even really know what we're aiming at. We don't have a picture of what we want life to be or what God's calling us to 5 years from now. And so how would I set a course if I don't have a focus of where this is supposed to go? In January of 2021, I did a message series called You in 5 Years. And the whole idea was for our whole church to say, hey, do you think about your future? Do you think, well, if this is where I want to be, if this is where I want my kids to be, if this is where I want my marriage to be, if this is where I want my money to be, then I'm going to start now and start progressing there, you in 5 years. And guys, I want to call you to this. Where do you want to be financially in 5 years? 5 years is long enough that you could get out of debt entirely if you aimed at it and focused on the goal. You might financially say, I want to start to be more generous. I want to be a giver who makes a difference in the world for Christ and his kingdom. 5 years, you can be a relational giver in 5 years if you're focused at it. What about your health? Are you focused? This is what a man would do. He would say, well, I know where I want to be with my health, and I'm not going to be passive about it. I'm not just going to keep eating whatever I want and sleep the same habits I've always had. No, I'm focused. How about relationally? Let's just talk about your marriage for a second if you're married. Today is my 29th wedding anniversary. How about that? You should clap. You should clap for Jenny, is what you should clap for. She's pretty fantastic. And one of the things I'll tell couples when I'm counseling them, I say, hey, on your anniversary every year, guys, you should just ask your wife, so was I a better husband this past year than I had been previously? Was I a better husband this past year than I have been previously? What would it take for me to be a better husband next year than I have been before? And you'll start to look at some life and some goals in some different ways. And I got to tell you, if you have a 5-year aim at being a better husband, if you get a little bit better, if you can get a yes to that question every year for 5 years, because you're focused on it. It's a primary thing in life. It's more important than your work. It's more important than how much money you make. It's more important. That's what we're focused on. This is the power of focused like a soldier, not distracted by other things. And I want to give everyone in this room, guys, but also the ladies, a tool to actually activate this. On our staff, we actually give our whole staff team 2 full days a year. They can take it in half days if they want. We call them abide days. And we basically say, hey, get out of the office, take your Bible and something to write with, and just go listen to what God is saying. Your employer's not going to give that to you. But you could arrange it in your life. I mean, if you want to be focused, say, I'll take a half day. I'll just take my Bible and a notebook and a pen, and I'm going to ask God the question, God, where do you want me in 5 years? What do I need to be focused on? And if you listen, if you think about it, he will help you understand. Put this into practice to be focused like a soldier. Then he gives us another image, an athlete. He says, athletes can't win the prize unless they follow the rules. He says, you don't get to win the prize if you cut corners, if you take shortcuts, if you don't follow the rules. You got to be forged like an athlete. So last weekend, if you were here for Father's Day, we had that thing out in the front yard there, guys throwing baseballs, seeing how fast you could throw. I went out after our Thursday night service. I thought, I don't know, maybe I could throw a baseball faster than anyone at our Thursday service. And I looked up on the board. There's a young man in our church named Josh, pitches for Lake Central High School, stepped out of his car without warming up and threw at 87. I'm like, I guess I will not be winning this competition, right? And here's what I think. I can throw a baseball. Josh can throw a baseball, but we are not the same. One of us has been forged, and one of us has not. We've been doing these 5:30 a.m. workouts on Wednesday morning. One more coming up. Actually, your last chance this coming Wednesday, guys. I'd love to have you here at 5:30. This past Wednesday morning at 5:30, there's a ton of us out there. We're on the parking lot out here, and the guy who's leading us, he's like, all right, we're going to do some push-ups. And I get down to do some push-ups, and I look to Kyle, who's right next to me, and he's doing push-ups on the asphalt on his knuckles. And I'm like, well, I'm doing push-ups, and Kyle's doing push-ups, but we are not the same. We are not the same. He's been forged in a way that I have not been forged. Here, this is real. Unless you've put in the time, unless you've brought some training, unless you've put in the work, unless you stopped cutting corners, you don't excel in those ways. And I got to tell you, I don't hesitate to say, I hope that when people get up close to me and they experience me praying, I hope that you will say, you know what, Greg prays and I pray, but we don't pray the same way. And I hope that when people get up close to me and they see how I lead, I hope there will be guys in my life who will look at me and they'll be like, well, I lead and Greg leads, but we don't lead the same way. He's been forged. I hope that in my life, when people get up close to me and they see how I trust God with my money, that people will come up close and be like, well, I trust God with my money and Greg trusts God with his money, but we don't do it the same way because he's been forged in that way. And that's my curiosity. Forged like an athlete. Are you putting in the effort that it requires, not cutting corners, not breaking the rules, not taking the shortcuts, not hoping for the quick fix, but putting in the work? You know, all of us in our lives are a combination of nature and nurture. You were dealt a hand in life that was out of your control. Certain physical gifts, certain relational background in your family that you have, you were dealt a hand. And then every one of us plays the hand we were dealt. And I'm talking about playing the hand you're dealt. Some of you were given tremendous strengths, great insight, real wisdom. And the question is, are you taking that thing and forging it for the good of this world? Some of you were given a lot of relational health growing up. And you were given that. It was granted to you. Now, are you taking that and investing that in the next generation? Some of you were given pain in your life. And even the pain in our life needs to be forged so that it comes out of us with great purpose rather than the demons inside. But only people who are forged like an athlete get here. Most of the time, this is about doing something hard now so it will be good later. Guys, can we kind of admit something to each other in the room? Most of us are better men when we have a responsibility. I know it would feel good to be like, hey, I have some freedom, but you're not as good of a man when you have freedom. Most of you are far worse men when your wife is out of town or you find yourself alone. It's because we were built for responsibility and to be forged to take that on. When Jenny came to me with the idea of being foster parents years ago, I was hesitant about it because I thought this is going to take some of the comforts away from our life. I thought we were about done. I thought finally we'd have some money. But here we are. And I was hesitant, but eventually said yes. And I can just tell you, saying yes has been the greatest decision of my life. It is taking on a responsibility where you see a joyful end to that responsibility. Last weekend was Father's Day. I have a 6-year-old who was our foster son, and we adopted Davion. He's the best. If you see him, you'll love Davion. He goes back to my office on Sunday mornings. Of course, I have 3 services here. He's here usually for the first 2 services. And usually when I go back to my office, I look on my wall, which is a whiteboard wall. Very cool. And he's usually drawn some pictures on it or something like this. I walked back to my office last weekend, and this is what was on my wall. That's worth an awe, don't you think? Just finished kindergarten, wrote that on my wall. I walk in, I'm like, that's awesome. So I go home after the 3rd service, and I walk in the door, and I see Davion sitting at our kitchen table with one of his older brothers. And he was making a card for me for Father's Day. And he said, wait, Dad, I'm not done yet. Could you sit down for a minute? And then he finished it, and he brought it over, and he said, Dad, happy Father's Day. Jackson showed me that I spelled happy wrong, and he gave it to me. I'm like, it needed 2 P's. I'm like, did you notice? But oh my goodness, I was hesitant. I didn't think, are we going to start over? We got old kids. Are we going to raise young kids again? But men are better when you have a responsibility. It forges you and causes you to carry the weight that you are called to carry. And then it brings something about, a joy that you can only experience through living out the sacrificial responsibility and seeing what God does through it. And then there's the image of a farmer. You gotta be faithful like a farmer. A lot of you know I grew up in an agricultural area. I'm like, I don't get to talk about farming very much, so when it comes up in the text, I'm like, yes, let's talk about this. I know lots of things about farming, but here's the main one. You plant in the spring, and you don't harvest until the fall. You plant in the spring, and you do a lot of hard work. You put in a lot of time and a lot of effort, and you do not harvest until the fall. There is something about faithfulness over time rather than immediate gratification that is what shapes us into the men we need to be. Listen, I don't think anyone here is surprised that I hold faithfulness in very high regard. Anniversary today. I've been at Suncrest next month for 29 years. I think I got 40 or 45 in me. We'll see how that goes. Last week, I was at lunch with Jamie and Mitch, two of our pastors. Jamie's been with us for 13 years. Mitch just had his 10th anniversary on our staff. Isn't that awesome? Yeah, cheer for Mitch. And we were talking about Mitch and kind of the stage of his development that he's at. And he's done so many amazing things here already and, kind of at a stage of life where he's looking at what's next. And I just looked him in the eye and I said, Mitch, you've been here for 10 years. You've poured everything into this place. You've been faithful here. If you've been here 10 years, listen, we can shape some of your responsibility. We can shape your experiences around what you want to shape you. I don't do that for people who have been here 1 year. I don't do that for people who have been, if you've been on our staff for a year or two and you're like, well, but I want to do this. I'd be like, sorry, we hired you to do that. But if you've been here 10 years, and you planted in the spring, then it's the fall. And you should get someone to invest in you for your next steps and your development. I'm just telling you, faithfulness really, really matters. And I don't know how you think about this in your own life, but Tinder is easy. Porn is fast. You can make one decision and experience the pleasure of it within a matter of minutes or hours. But that's not being faithful like a farmer who understands that I'm going to put down some roots, I'm going to aim at something over the long term, and I'm going to be faithful. Listen, some of you have heard me say this before, but I get asked to speak different places. Because of how good you are, I get a lot of perks in life, honestly. And then when they ask me to speak somewhere or write something or something like that, they'll always say, hey, send us your bio. And they always want me to be like, list all the hey, this is how big my church is. This is how fast we've grown. This is how many churches we planted, all that. And listen, that stuff matters to me. I think you probably know that stuff matters to me. But after a while, I had to kind of ask myself, but what really matters to me? That stuff's important, but it's not the most important. And so now when people ask for my bio before I go speak somewhere, I always send them this. I say, hey, God's been good to Greg. It's always weird. You have to write your bio in the third person. Isn't that kind of weird? God's been good to Greg. He's aiming at two things in life. That when he gets to the end of his life, he would be faithful to the vow he made to Jenny. And he would be faithful to the vow he made to Jesus in his baptism. And if he can get to the end of his life and have been faithful to those two vows, that will be enough. There's something powerful about faithfulness. And you will never be the man that God's called you to be or the person God has called you to be unless you're willing to plant now, work hard now, do the hard parts, and trust that the results will come sometime in the future. Suncrest, when Christian men are focused and forged and faithful, everybody wins. The men win. The women win. The church wins. The broken world around us wins because we have embraced a life of sacrificial responsibility. And that is why masculinity is necessary. Well, I really hope that was helpful for integrating faith with life. Listen, if you're in Northwest Indiana, I'd love to have you join us in person. Head over to suncrest.org and plan your visit.